Okay, moving right along, and it's a great pleasure to actually be able to introduce fellow New South Wales Black Hole, Genevieve Grieves, who's a Worimi woman from New South Wales, of course, and now living down in Melbourne in Kulin Country. She was the lead curator of the First Peoples exhibition, opened 2013 at Melbourne Museum's Bunjilka Aboriginal Cultural Centre. Genevieve is a lecturer in the Australian Indigenous Studies Program, University of Melbourne, as well as an accomplished filmmaker and media artist. Her work has focused on how to tell stories in a way that is both accountable to community and charismatic. She has worked with the Koori Heritage Trust as an oral historian, with the ABC on the Mission Voices website, with Blackfella Films as a film producer and online content creator for the first Australian television series. She has also wrote and directed an award-winning documentary for SBS called Lani's Story. The exhibition First Peoples was overall winner at the 26th Annual American Alliance of Museums AAM Excellence in Exhibitions competition, and awards for Best Exhibition, Best Project nationwide at the Museums and Galleries National Award. Genevieve has immense skill and passion for arts, cultural and social action. Her work leads the forefront of Australian cultural storytelling. She will speak on celebrating living cultures using collections and institutions, translating difficult stories to wide audiences while openly obtaining and maintaining broad support for projects in the cultural sector. Now, I'm actually going to go a little bit off script here and actually say, as a fellow person and been around Genevieve, it's really unfortunate that there's so few people like Genevieve in key creative and cultural roles within the Australian arts and cultural sector. And I think the work that's highlighted with Genevieve and the amazing team that was down at Bunjilka actually shows the loss that Australian cultural society and society as a whole actually is missing out on, and the true benefits in actually not just engaging with Indigenous people or First Nations people, but fully embracing. And I think you'll see this with Genevieve's presentation. So thank you.
What an honour to be here tonight to speak to all of you. I've met so many amazing people through this summit who've been so inspiring, so I feel very, very honoured to be here. Before we talk at forums like this, we acknowledge, and I want to talk a little bit about acknowledgement. The word comes from Middle English and it means recognise, understand or admit. And so I want to acknowledge this country. If we acknowledge the country that we are on, we respect that country. And then we are aware of what it is giving us: life, nourishment, a place to be and to belong. If we were to acknowledge country in this way, we would have to care for it in a reciprocal relationship, not just take what we need without giving back. There is so much that could be achieved in all the environmental crises that we face in this country if we truly acknowledged it. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and the elders of this country. In this acknowledgement, I recognise that this country was and is Aboriginal country that was not ceded and that is connected to people who have survived the ravages of colonisation and are still here today. I recognise that this country, for more than 2,000 generations, has been cared for, sung, danced and managed. I then recognise that there are people who know this country in intimate, deep and profound ways, who managed this country through the Ice Age, through the time that megafauna lived on this continent, who kept an ecological balance that respected all things in a complex totemic system. So in acknowledging the people of this particular country, I recognise that there is deep knowledge and understanding of this place held by these custodians. Knowledge of how to be in and care for this country. Another important lesson for our shared future on this planet. So I acknowledge the traditional owners and elders of this country and all the elders here with us tonight. And I acknowledge the ancestors. It is from the past that our cultures learn our lessons for the future. Australian Indigenous cultures, as with Indigenous cultures across the globe, look back for wisdom and knowledge and teachings. So we always acknowledge those who came before and who are still with us. So I acknowledge the ancestors of this country, the ancestors of the country I live and work on, Kulin country, and my own ancestors. So I acknowledge all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here, and in fact all people here tonight. When we acknowledge the people around us, our sisters and brothers of all faiths, sexualities and cultures, we express our shared humanity. And if we could more often recognise this shared humanity, we would care for other people as if they were our own. Open our doors to them, open our homes to them, see them as part of ourselves. Their concerns are ours, their pain is ours, and their joy is ours. So I acknowledge all of you tonight. I'm here to talk about an exhibition called First Peoples. I was the lead curator of this exhibition, and there's a few people in the room who are a very big part of it, including Vicky Cousins, who is a curator, Lee Darrick, who actually donated a beautiful baby cloak, and Robert Bundle, who just held us all together. We were all losing our minds. To acknowledge the people around us, those who've contributed to who we are and what we do, is to move beyond the individual to the collective. This is an Indigenous cultural framework, and one that I'm guided by. I'm not here representing myself. I'm part of a much greater whole that informs, shapes and guides me, and I'm grateful for these learnings and teachings I receive. So I'm one of many staff who worked on this exhibition. It was a huge team encompassing curators, designers, carpenters, builders, conservators. In the spirit of acknowledgement, I'd like to name them all, but we'd be here forever. But I would like to say that it takes many people and many skills and many knowledges to bring something like this together. It's an exercise in collaboration and collective wisdom, where each part is equally important to the making of the whole. And this exhibition was challenging to make in many, many ways, not just in terms of deadlines and pressures, but also staff had to engage in deep listening. They had to shift their working practices to create new and culturally appropriate ways of working, which helped ultimately to create something beautiful. One of the key learnings they needed to take was that they needed to take the time to allow things to be worked through, and not everyone found this easy. But we had to allow community decision-making and leadership to take place in order to build a space that had cultural integrity. I've talked about the many contributions of the museum staff, but at the heart of this exhibition are the narratives of First Peoples and communities in Victoria and across the nation. We as an exhibition team were given so many gifts from elders, artists, families and individuals of objects, art, stories and knowledge. This working together and these many gifts underlined a wish for change and for understanding from broader Australia of the beauty, sophistication and complexity of our cultures. All the communities we worked with welcomed the opportunity to create this social change through the sharing of culture and stories. This process was overseen and guided by our Yulin group, and Yulin is a Kulin word for law and knowledge. And I'm going to come back to them and tell you a bit more about that. But we need to take a step back and think about the space in which this exhibition was created. So museums are largely colonial institutions. Our Melbourne Museum was established in 1854, only 20 years after John Batman and other settlers arrived to Melbourne. Many of you would be aware of the past practices of museums. They were part and parcel of colonisation, collecting and classifying people, artefacts and cultures. Their acts of classification were tied up in the racial scientific thinking of the time that continues in different forms today. And this legacy is still a difficult space for us to navigate. And sometimes people talk about the post-colonial as if we are beyond these times and they are in the distant past. But theorists such as Eileen Morton Robertson says that Australia is in a post-colonising state, not a post-colonial. By this she means that colonial structures are still in place and we are still attempting to move beyond them. Many museums are attempting to decolonise, to change their processes. They're supporting the aspirations of Indigenous people and communities. They're employing Indigenous staff and they're developing policies based on repairing the actions of the past. But this is an active, ongoing and challenging process. Decolonisation is not a simple task. It requires dominant cultures to deconstruct, to shift and emerge anew. So this is First Pupils. And what does it take to build an exhibition of this kind? We thought about what had come before and had many learnings from within the museum, and they've put on a lot of large permanent exhibitions, and we also had previous exhibitions to look at and see what had worked and what hadn't. We started off with a consultation process with communities, so we travelled around the Victorian state twice, sat down, listened to people about what were the most important things that needed to be shared, and that developed our concept and sort of the beginnings of this exhibition. We did a lot of audience evaluation. There's been a lot of discussion at this summit about audience, and I think audience evaluations are a very important tool for understanding not what audiences want or don't want, but how to work with them and how to translate information to them in ways that they can take. Our audiences, when we're developing this exhibition, were ready for the hard histories. Previously, in other exhibitions, they weren't. They didn't want to know about frontier violence. They didn't want to know the hard stories. But there was a willingness and a readiness now to go there, which was great for us because that's where we wanted to go too. Audiences were also very clear that they didn't want to hear white scientific voices. They didn't want to hear from the museum. They wanted to hear from Aboriginal people, and that was perfect for us as well. Curriculum was very important for us, and we made sure there were pathways all the way through the exhibition for each year group. And then we had to think about what narratives we were going to tell. We've had thousands upon thousands of objects and images, but we really had to work out what stories were ready to be told, what people were ready to tell, and there were some stories that we couldn't tell because it's not the right time. And then we had to develop a process, and we went on all sorts of journeys in doing this and ended up at Ullage, which I'll talk to you a bit more about. So First Peoples opened in November 2013. It's 1,200 square metres, it cost $6 million. It took more than 4 years. I was on it for 4 years, but there were people who were on it for a lot longer. It has over 1,000 objects and 1,000 images. And if any of you worked in the sector, you know how much work goes into each of them. It's got 50 plus hours of multimedia content, and thousands of people are represented in the space. After we opened, visitation to the museum jumped by 30%, and we don't get those kind of figures for our blockbusters, so it was actually a really good lesson for the museum that people want to know these stories. In terms of the visitor experience, it's largely a Victorian exhibition, but it does have some national context. It's one exhibition with a number of different experiences, and people can experience things through objects or through images, or in a large social history exhibition called Our Story. But at the heart of this exhibition are 3 concepts, and this sort of guided us in all the things that we did in terms of the content we were developing. And one of them was diversity. So our audiences have very little understanding of the diversity of Aboriginal people and cultures. Now, Australia was a multicultural nation before invasion, and it's still one today. Views of Aboriginality are often very homogenising, and we don't speak with one voice. We don't have one culture. We're very, very diverse nations and people. So as soon as people enter the exhibition, they see a map of Victoria with brass message sticks that you can touch. It's an interactive experience, and you can hear voices from across the state. You can hear all the language groups, and it was kind of saying we're here as well as diverse. Oops, yes. And next to that is a large object-rich display with over 500 objects called Many Nations, which has objects from all different nations across the country, and the key message in that section is diversity. That's a little zoom into one of the cases, so they're a beautiful, rich, diverse range of objects, each with a digital label. Connection is an Indigenous framework that's applied across the exhibition. This is a basket that was in our collections, and all we had was the name of the basket, which is Midja, a language name, and we knew that it was made about 1869. So through deep research, starting with the language name and through a partnership with the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages and hard work by Vicky, so language is embedded all the way through the exhibition, we discovered that woven into this basket, which we knew nothing about in terms of the database, was connections to country, so a Wamba basket, and connections to sustainable harvest, ecology and constellation. So this basket was used to collect the eggs of malleefowl that had a particular purpose, and there's a constellation that came or disappeared in September, and that's when you were to collect the eggs. So this one basket had deep knowledge and deep stories, and we treated every object in that way to say each object is connected to people and to country and to culture. It's not just a Southeast Australian basket. Another way of providing connections was through people. So every object we put on display, our Yulunj group connected to, this is Uncle David Tunia, and he found in our collections a basket made by his grandmother. So he was able to tell us a story of that basket, which became the interpretation of that basket, rather than us as a museum saying basket made with these fibres and that sort of stuff. We actually got a story that was about his family and was about sustainability, was about practice of cultural knowledge. Also at the heart of this exhibition is continuity, and that was a reminder to us to always bring narratives into the present. Every aspect of our past continues or has impacts into the present. And in the Our Story section, we have a beautiful story about Murnong. So Murnong is a yam daisy that was harvested across southeastern Australia, and with the introduction of hard-hoofed animals, a lot of the Murnong farms were destroyed, so there was a lot of impacts in that, but Murnongs actually started to be grown and harvested along the Mary Creek by Wurundjeri people, and Mandy Nicholson and her daughter Kaya wrote and sung a song for us, which you can hear.
Winyera ulele Bajar munde kundaronit na nyino ulele Bajar munde kundaronit na nyino ulele.
So Mandy wrote that song for us for the exhibition, and now it's sung every year at the Murnong harvest by Wurundjeri people. Continuity is also a reminder that all the policies of the past continue into the present, and that was an important message in the exhibition. So this is an exhibition that largely focuses on the local, on southeastern or Victorian narratives and connection to place. And not everyone in the museum was supportive of this aim when we first started making it. And I guess you're wondering why that would be the case. And I think really the cultures of southeastern Australia have often been ignored. We were the front line of colonisation, and we felt the impacts deeply. But also ideas of Aboriginality are also very essentialised, and that is based on stereotypes. So people often don't see what is before them, which in the case of the Southeast is strong, vibrant and diverse communities. The focus on the local is also important for Aboriginal communities because we need to build capacity in our communities, such as the Murnong story, where we're supporting initiatives that are already taking place and strengthening them and giving them space. Because we need language revival, and we need initiatives to care for country, and we need to maintain and revive culture, because culture is what keeps us strong, it connects us to our spirit and is at the core of our well-being. But it's not just First Peoples who need this focus on the local, it is everyone who lives on this country now. People live on this country and they sense that there are stories connected to it, that there are creation stories, that there are people who have lived and belonged to country for more than 2,000 generations. And many of them want to know more. They want to understand a country they've been born into or come in their journeys of migration, and they also want to come to peace with their history, what we can call a shared history. And in the exhibition there's a section that talks about post-contact histories, and Yulunj told us that we had to name it Our Shared History, and they told us to tell the positive stories and the negative stories. Then they said it's our shared history because all these stories belong to all of us now. They're not just Aboriginal stories, they're stories that everyone needs to know and hold. So coming to Yulunj, as I said, we started in a model of consultation, and that wasn't really the model we wanted, but over time we were able to put forward arguments and get support for a collaborative model of content development. So we had, I think, about 16 reps from across the state who'd come in and workshop content with us. So we didn't have meetings, we had week-long workshops, and we still had a normal museum exhibition timeline, but every week, it was probably a week out of every 6 weeks or every month, we'd stop and we'd spend time with Yulunj and we'd talk through all the stories, we'd listen, we'd show them all the objects, and they would guide us in everything that we did. And they are all strong people who have cultural authority and have knowledge, and who gave so much to us, and we all learnt from the experience of having Yulunj. There were staff who were really transformed and actually understood what we've been talking about for a long time. We're saying, all the knowledge is in community, and Yulunj would come in and spend time with objects, and people were blown away by the stories that they heard. So it was a transformative process for all. Oh, this is a quote from Brendan Kennedy, one of the Yulunj members. There's a lot of information on the website, on the URL. I showed you there too. So there's stories from all of the Yulunj members about the process, so there's lots there for you to look at. So this is sort of the entrance to the exhibition, and on the right-hand side, that's our Yulunj wall. So Yulunj all gave us a design, and that's actually built into that wall. So their signatures and their marks and their presence is actually built into the exhibition, but it's all the way through. Their voices, their stories, their knowledge is everywhere. And there's a case at the front, which is a message stick that was built for this exhibition. And I guess the messages that I want to give today are that foundations of cultural integrity create innovation and excellence. That audiences want to hear from First Peoples of this country because it is actually about all of us. We are intertwined, our histories and our present. The time is right to bring to the forefront Indigenous knowledges, and we need, as people, all of us, to be looking to new ways forward outside of Western paradigms that have left our earth in devastation and people disconnected from one another. As we showed in First Peoples, this does not mean disregarding other knowledges. It's about integrating different approaches to create a holistic and deeper understanding. Opening the doors to Yulunj brought so much value into the museum, and the collaborations with designers, conservators, scientists were exciting and extraordinary. That relationships are at the heart of the creation of successful projects, and these are ongoing relationships. There is so much we can do if we are working together, and this exhibition has planted a seed that with commitment will continue to grow. When this exhibition opened, someone said to me, this exhibition is anti-museum. And I said, it's not anti-museum, it's what the museum can be. So just to finish, I want to share something with you from the exhibition. And I have to acknowledge Vicky Cousins here because she curated this and she held the cultural space for this to happen. But this is Bunjil's Nest. So when you walk into the exhibition, you walk into this beautiful installation by a Glenram artist, Watherong artist, and you come to this kinetic sculpture. And I'm just going to show you a bit of that now.
Bunjil, the eagle, is our creator.
Bunjil Majigan Nanyin.
Wah, the crow, is our protector.
Wah the kid ingrat.
Bunjil sent the ancestor spirits to create the world.
Banjo Urama Lewik Pulau Muka Jipik.
He sung the country.
They made the mountains and valleys.
Wangandi munting kauba utara.
He sung all the creatures. Yengi Maniga, Daganangat.
They made all the creeks and rivers.
Liwik mungkabalo, ululun bagalada.
He sung the people.
Inglakan untuk
Bunjil sung the law,
Bunju yingling ki jiri.
how to be in country,
yun na chapja.
How to care for family and children.
Nurikun darapagi kiran pino.
to remember our ancestors and old people.
Jarpunda mantigori ingra ba yarmi bala.
If Bunjil's laws are broken, he destroys.
Panjuluno, Kalgora, Bunjilka, Genevieve.
When the ancestor spirits finished their work, they ascended to the sky and became the stars.
Matinga ko like inga woroi.
Nanigadan to pino.
We dance,
Nyarga nangino.
we sing
Yengino. Inga nangino.
to remember,
Jarpunda
to respect,
Bundu nangino.
To uphold.
Jalka makkonin telamana.
We become.
Marano.
we are.
mukangoro.
Thank you.